Today's webinar is entitled, Is Your Warehouse OSHA Ready? I think OSHA has been a hot topic for us all over the last little bit, and we'll kind of explain why and help guide you through some of the best practices that you can adopt at your facilities to make sure that you're in compliance. I'm Mark Rousseau. I head up the national accounts team here at Damotech. And as I mentioned before, my partner in crime, Charles Carbonneau, our chief engineer and PhD in structural engineering, will be joining us at the tail end of the presentation to talk about some of the questions that you may have. So why rack safety? Why are you all taking your time out of for those on the East Coast, taking time out of a busy lunch to learn about rack safety, and for those that are at different parts of the world, why you taking an hour out of your time to learn more about things like rack safety. Well, as we've mentioned before, the title of the webinar is if you're OSHA ready. So OSHA has instituted a whole bunch of programs, and things have been in place now for some time. I think anybody who operates in the US is familiar with OSHA. So governments, whether OSHA or otherwise, require employers to maintain a safe working environment. And there's like kind of a catch-all clause that ensures that employers will take care of their employees. So although there isn't a strict directive specific to racking within OSHA, there's nevertheless a catch-all clause that ensures that were you not to allow your workers to work in a safe environment, then they can come get you. OSHA, in the summer of 2023, launched what's called a National Emphasis Program for warehousing and storage specifically. They did some number crunching, and they found that warehousing and storage had almost a 2x greater likelihood of injuries versus other private industries combined. So there's been a considerable emphasis on warehousing and storage just from an OSHA perspective. And as much as they want to reduce injuries and look at proactive safety measures, they nevertheless are now able to, when called into your facility, legally pivot towards looking at your racking. So how does that impact your workplace? So very simply, if someone were to call OSHA and say, hey, you know what, I'm concerned about the means of egress at my facility. The fire exit doors are always encumbered with boxes or material. So OSHA, they do what they do. They mobilize to site and they look at that problem with the fire exit. But today, with the National Emphasis Program, they're allowed to pivot, go and take a look at your racking. They'll take a look at whether you have damage to your racks. They're going to look at whether you have the appropriate load capacity placards or labels on your rack. So it's something that we've seen hinder some of our clients, because no one wants OSHA to come into your facility. But now with the NEP, they have now the legal ability to pivot and look at racking within the facility. So we want to make sure that throughout today's presentation that you take away some of those lessons learned that we've garnered over time, and that'll help you navigate some of these challenges. So now that we've kind of opened up with OSHA, talking about racking in general, why is a rack safety program important? Well, if you look at racking by its very nature, it's meant to be efficient, right? When OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, design a rack, they design them with the least amount of steel, the lowest gauge, to ensure they can support as much as weight as possible. So that's why racking is sold dollars per pound. So you have an appreciation for this is a very efficient system. It is not meant for impact traditionally. It's really meant to support vertical loads. So as we disturb, those uprights and those systems with an impact, we now kind of, disrupt how those structures are not going to perform. So examples that you see here are, examples of forklift impact and what can happen when those things are impacted. So starting from left to right, you can see, bracing damage. You can see front column damage. The middle picture shows, a step back style of upright that got impacted, and it's no longer even making contact with the slab anymore. And then we have, a drive-in situation where there was an impact because of a heavy load, and that drive-in rail is barely supporting that heavy pallet that's sitting there. So uprights are simply not designed to withstand impact, as they do, you're now compromising that structural integrity. And when you compromise that structural integrity and you don't take action, well, these are the consequences of having something like that happen. We never like showing these images. You're going to see a few videos throughout the presentation that kind of highlight this a bit more. But ultimately, we all, as owners of companies and managers and safety professionals, these are the things that we want to avoid, because we want to make sure that our workers go home safe. So ignoring some of those damages that I showed in the previous slides puts us on the path towards something that could be catastrophic. So we have at Damotech put together what we call a rack safety flywheel. So it's call it an elegant way of displaying or describing how a rack safety program could be put afoot. So we start off with something very simple, and if we think of a flywheel as being something that you're trying to put in motion, so it takes a lot of effort initially to get that wheel to move. It takes a lot of resources and effort, but as the wheel starts turning in the right direction, the amount of effort that it takes to keep that wheel in motion is a lot less. So as we start with the flywheel, we say to ourselves, what is it that I'm trying to improve? What is it that I'm trying to solve for? And in this particular case, right, it's rack safety. Then we build out the wheel with why is this important? Why will you invest time and effort to ensure you have an adequate rack safety program? Well, first and foremost, at the top of that circle is employee well-being, right? I mean, we want to make sure that we take care of our employees, that they go back home to their families, and that they're working in a safe environment. On the left side of that wheel, we have compliance. So yes, we're looking after our associates. We're making sure that they're working in a safe environment. But there's also, whether it's a corporate compliance, and if you don't have a corporate compliance program, well, as I mentioned before, OSHA is there to ensure that you do or are compliant with the rules and the regulations that are out there. And the third leg of that stool is operational efficiency. So we want to be mindful of safety for our employees, of being compliant with the regulations that are out there. But we also want to make sure that we're efficient operationally. So that means that as a rack is damaged and you're putting those bays out of service, it's just a matter of time before it becomes more and more painful to have all of those pallet positions out of service. Now, and if it's September and you're approaching October peak because you've got Halloween or you've got Christmas coming, having those bays out of service is not a good thing. So we want to be mindful that there's a dollar component to rack safety as well. Now, the other component is who. So we talked about what we're trying to solve for. We talked about why we're trying to implement something. Now, who should be relied on to help us with the program? So at the top of the circle, we have in-house knowledge. So you want to have your folks knowledgeable of the things that they should avoid or look out for as they see damage to their uprights or their beams. So you never want to be solely reliant on an outside party, which, by the way, is at the bottom of that circle, third-party expertise. So there's absolutely no way that you will have sufficient knowledge, at least not traditionally. You won't have sufficient knowledge to have the 10,000 foot deep understanding of racking like you will have from an expert third party that'll come in and really assess things from the ground up. So you want to have two ways of approaching rack safety. You want to have that third party come in and have that baseline appreciation for what's going on in your facility, but you also want to be able to empower folks on the ground of your own staff to be able to do the right things when it comes to rack safety. Then I start filling in the wheel with the different components. So in this particular case, there's an inspection element. So there's a third party audit, understanding what's going on with the various things going on with your racking. And then there's an insight phase, which is, taking that information that was collected on site by professionals and then distilling it in a way that's actionable. That leadership can understand and say, okay, I understand now what I have to spend money on and what I have to invest in resource wise to be able to kind of fix the things that were identified, which really leads us to the maintenance phase, right? So after I have all this insight, and if you've had, a good third party come in, they'll be able to distill this information in a way that is very clear and that the path to fixing things is just set out for you. And so we do all those things in the maintenance phase. We fix all the high priority issues that were identified during the inspection, and we put those to bed. And now we ensure that things are where they're supposed to. And depending on how successful the program is, invest in preventing those things from happening in the first place. So we inspect, we get a report that gives us a certain degree of insight. We put a plan in place to maintain and address those things, and we put a plan in place to prevent those things from happening in the first place. Then I continue filling out the wheel with other components of the flywheel that just kind of demonstrate the effectiveness of a program like this. So we're going to start off with the inspection piece, and we'll make our way through the wheel as we go. So rack damage. No one can, I think, ever pinpoint at what point damage is going to lead to a collapse. And is it imminent, or is it something that's going to stay around for a while? There's no one smart enough in the world to say that a half-inch deformation on your front upright column is going to lead to a collapse tomorrow, or in 3 weeks, or in 6 months, or in 6 years for that matter. So an inspection just allows you to better understand that there's damage, there are things that are not in keeping with code that you have to address. So here are some videos of collapses that take place, and honestly, you just never know where it's going to happen at what point, and the amount of violence that comes through these things is significant. Here's one here. It's a very, very minor impact. Just came into position, and it was enough because of repeated damage that had taken place on that component before. That last little tap of the forklift was significant enough to have that position collapse and everything around it. Here's one that kind of made the YouTube wave some time ago. Again, we're not helping this driver. We put product in the aisle, barely clipped the upright, but it was enough to have that location collapse. And because racking is designed the way it is, as it's connected together to bring it stability, well, it just pulls down everything with it. So it's very difficult to watch. But now we have an appreciation for, if things are not designed the right way and we don't protect things the way we're supposed to, we can see what can happen. So this is another example here. We're in a seismic area, and the racking unfortunately was not designed to withstand a seismic event the way it was supposed to. So we kind of see some shaking, and then it's a matter of time before the components just let go. So we have design codes, and we have things set out in the codes to allow for the proper design of uprights, especially in seismic environments. So, and this is a map here that people, I'm sure, who are versed in who follow seismic events and stuff, we all know where those pockets of high seismic events take place. The West Coast being one that's all in red. We have places, in Northwest Tennessee that are also that way. Well, we have to be mindful, and we'll talk about this as we make our way through the presentation, that there are areas that have to have their racking designed differently to withstand these sorts of events. So how often should racks be inspected? We've seen this in the past. It's run the gamut from people think it should be once a year or should be every week, and we all kind of say, and we've concluded with our experience that it happens over time, that an annual inspection should be done by a third party. So at least once a year, you should look to have your inspection done by a qualified third party, again, to give you that baseline. And every year it will allow you to reset that baseline to ensure you're not missing some of the more minute details that take place with an inspection. Monthly, absolutely have your own folks do it. If you remember the flywheel before, you don't want to solely rely on a professional third party to come in to perform your inspections, because you're just going to be waiting once a year for that information to be made available to you. Train your own folks, have somebody from the outside, train your own associates on how to perform an inspection, not to the degree and depth that a professional will do, but hit the highlights. And we'll talk about what those are here in a second. Hit those highlights once a month so that you're not waiting too long before something gets out of sync. Now, there could be instances in your warehouse, whether it's shipping and receiving or another high velocity aisle, sometimes it's in a freezer or otherwise, or V&As, where those particular areas of the warehouse should be inspected more frequently. So it could be once a week in some areas, and it could be on a daily basis because of the amount of velocity that we're seeing through those sections of racking. Now, when do you want to inspect? So we talk about the frequency. Now we're going to talk about when. So incomplete documentation. So if you don't have all the engineering drawings that are current for your facility, that's an opportunity for an inspection. If you've reconfigured or you have a new installation of racking, so if you moved the beams around or you have you put a new section of racking in, you want to make sure that it was done correctly. And if you did reconfigure the racking, you want to make sure that an engineer puts eyes on that racking to make sure that it was done correctly. Of course, if you have an accident, you're going to want to understand how things happened and are the components still in working condition. If you have OSHA, if OSHA comes in, I guarantee you're going to want to call a professional to come out and better understand what's going on, because OSHA will take no time before they cite you for having damage or before they take other steps to now reach into the rest of your organization to see what's going on. And of course, if you have a corporate safety initiative or performance benchmarking, that's also an opportunity to have a third party come in and inspect. So what is an inspection? And I've already kind of alluded to it a few times. It's a third-party audit. So it's a conformity to codes and standards. So their ANSI has elaborated a very specific code for racking and the design of racking. RMI is also a great repository for information on the codes, and like the building code also has a say in this. So codes and standards, are you abiding by what the codes and standards say? Has it been performed? Has that inspection been performed by a trained engineer? Are you getting a detailed report, as I kind of alluded to as part of the flywheel? And do you have key findings and recommendations? So that to me, or to us, is really what you want to seek out of having that independent inspection performed. So what does that comprise of? So first and foremost, I look at the upright. So damage to components, how much deformation do you have on your front or on the side of your upright, on the braces? Is there a buckling that's about to take place? Are you vertical? So or is your racking plumb, or has it shifted over time and you're not exactly straight? Do you have adequate clearance? Are there row spacers where they're supposed to be? Braces, all those things. I mean, the racking was designed to perform a certain way, and if components are missing or if they're not straight, they're simply not going to perform the way they're supposed to. Beams, some obvious things, right? If you have overloaded a beam and you have a deflection that's not coming back the way it's supposed to, that's a cause for concern. Damaged beams, if you have a detached beam or an unclipped beam, if you didn't have a safety device in place to prevent that beam from unclipping, that could be cause for concern as well. And of course, things like safety bars, which aren't mandatory, but they're a good thing to have in the event that a pallet is misplaced by the forklift operator. Safety, is there protection against falling objects? Do you have adequate protection in tunnels? If you have a pedestrian walkway behind a pallet position, is there netting to prevent, the unfortunate falling of product? All of those things are important things from a safety perspective to include, where the workstations are out of traffic, and you have LARCs, which is our load capacity documentation, and are they displayed? Of course, other things that we want to be mindful of is rust. So rust is not like a damaged component, but it's something that in certain environments, whether because it's a chemically caustic, or maybe you have areas, outdoors where you have racking, where you have a lot of humidity that could lead to rust over time, or even in some food and beverage facilities. You could have like a chicken room where again you have all of those juices that corrode product over time. So all of those things, whether it's corrosion, it's the fact that there are welded repairs, are things that we want to be mindful of. So as we continue to make our way through the presentation, I just wanted to make sure I didn't skip anything. Okay, yeah. So when we talk about independent inspections, we want to be mindful of the checklist that we want to use. Now, you don't have to go to the degree of detail that we have, as a third-party expert. Sometimes it's just a matter of saying, "Hey, do I have damage to my upright? Do I have damages to my bracing or the beams?" You put the location down. You say whether it's a high or moderate, and with the right education, you'll be able to determine what those are. But again, we're trying to keep things very simple for the associates that are performing their inspections on a periodic basis. Now, this checklist is available on our website, and you're able to download it. And of course, if you have the benefit of having a more sophisticated third party come in, they could have software like we have that allows for the viewing of that information, so that you're able to see what took place, and even allow your associates to use the inspection software in some cases. So here's a great example of, a little bit zoomed in on what those inspection checklists could look like. So again, very, very simple, high level areas that'll ensure that you're attacking the most egregious parts of your inspection. And as we keep on going here, an inspection history is vital. So again, depending on whether you're supported by software or not, you'll want to see the history of your inspections to ensure that you understand, hey, a year ago we found, 30 high priority issues in our warehouse. It's now a year later. Have those things been dispositioned? Have I addressed those things as part of my maintenance program, or are they still outstanding items that I want to look for? So having the ability to go back in time and see whether the components have been addressed, I think is another vital piece of the program that you're going to put together from an inspection standpoint. So as we again come back to our four blocker on inspections, we started the call with talking about OSHA and how OSHA can come into a facility and again pivot because of the national emphasis program towards looking at your racking. And one of the binary things that OSHA can do, and that they do, is look at whether you have up-to-date low capacity information on your racking. You're required by code to have a placard or labels on your racking that show the capacity, pounds per pallet position or pounds per beam, that you have in your racking. And if you happen to move the racking around, shift the beams up or down, those have to be updated accordingly. So it's a very binary thing for OSHA when they come in and they just ask, hey, where are your low capacities? I'm not seeing anything posted. That's when things kind of start going the wrong way on you. So we'll talk about that a bit more. So the importance of knowing load capacity, as I just mentioned, one, it ensures a safe warehouse operation. So your workers and your forklift operators know how much can be loaded on a particular beam. If it's limited to, 1,000 pounds per pallet and you're sticking in 3,000, well, that's a problem. Of course, you want to be compliant with the regulations that are out there, and you want to have operational efficiency because you don't want to be overloading areas or shutting areas down because of a concern for load capacity. So understanding rack load capacity is crucial for a safe and efficient workplace. Now, low capacity, this is a great visual. Low capacity is like overloading a truck and it can lead to catastrophic results, right? So we're seeing a great example here where, this trailer was probably designed for half of what's being loaded, but people went ahead and said, why not? I'm just going to load it as much as I can. And then at some point, the metal just gives and it decides that I just can't take anymore. So they go ahead and it goes ahead and collapses. So here's another example of overloading a rack and how it can lead to failure. So this is an example where the rack had been loaded for a certain amount, and it's just a matter of time before that component decides that the stress is too much and it decides to give. Now here's a video of what happens when you overload a rack. So it's kind of a simulation using foam core kind of racking. So we designed this in-house. So we're going to start loading up the rack with a certain amount of plates. And as we keep on loading it, we're going to get to a point where the racking won't be able to withstand what weight is being put on it. So we're going to, and our associate here is going to keep on loading the rack. And as you can see, as the plaques come in, I mean, I don't know how else to say it. And the video kind of does a great job of showing you simply don't know how many more plaques you're going to be able to put on the rack before it decides to give. I talked about reconfiguring racks. So this is another great example of what happens when you reconfigure a rack. So here's rack, right? We had pallet positions that were there, and now we're removing the first beam level entirely. Now we're going to put those pallets back in position the way they were before. And there you go. That's what happens. When you increase that unsupported length by that much, it has a dramatic effect on how much weight you can put back in that racking. That's why it's key when you have racking and you've moved beam levels around, have a professional come in and take a look. And here's another great example of what happens to capacities when you change beam levels. So here we have a 2 bays of racking, 4,500 pounds per pallet that we're able to put on these beams. And as soon as I raise that beam level to where my unsupported length has gone up by about a third, look what happens to my capacities. I lose a third of my capacities by just moving my beam up a foot. So it's significant, and we want to be mindful of what happens to these kind of structures when we start playing with beams. So defining load capacity. So what is rack load capacity? Well, it's the maximum load that can be placed on a storage system without risking failure. So the failure can be from deflection, it could be from stability, or it could just be the individual members kind of just giving. So back in the day, there was a time when you could look at these load tables. Now you'd be able to go to an OEM's website, and then they would have these tables for, what kind of gauge of an upright that you have, and the height of it and the depth of it, and you'd be able to say, okay, well, this upright can support this amount of weight. As of 2021, using tables is just not, I mean, I don't think it was ever a great idea to be quite honest, but as of 2021, tables are simply no longer valid since that standard was put in place. So we can't just look at a table and say to ourselves, well, hey, if I buy this upright at this gauge, I know it can withstand, this amount of loads, regardless of how I'm going to position my beams. It's simply not the true case anymore. Now, the design code is very specific. So in the US, we have a very, very deliberate code that goes around designing racking. All the OEMs follow this, and they're as a design rack, they have to follow this to a T. Now, of course, it goes into the building code and the different testing that's supposed to be put in place as racking is designed before it's sold. And of course, I won't go through the entire table of contents, but there's a significant content around the way the materials are supposed to be looked after, the loading combinations that we should be mindful of, the various design procedures and the steel elements, whether it's cold formed or hot rolled, all of those things kind of play a significant part in the design of racking. So it's not for the faint of heart. That's to be sure. Now, as we look at rack design today, the capacity of a frame, for those that are kind of new to this, depends on a variety of things. So one is the unbraced column span. Again, the way your bracing pattern is looked at. And then as we make our way to the next one, we look at the stiffness and the strength of the materials, the types of steel that is being used. We'll look at the beam to column connectors. So how are those connectors interfacing with the column is a key to how that those properties will be evaluated. And as we look at the beam stiffness, those again mechanical properties that go to how capacities are looked after, column stiffness. And as I make my way through here, the base plate and anchorage details, and every single load application drawing, you're going to have the details of your base plate, the thickness of it, and how the anchors are supposed to be executed on. So is it one anchor, two anchors? Is it four anchors for a base plate? Those are the kind of things that are going to be set out as part of the design process. I talked about seismicity before. So if you're in a seismic area, the engineers that are designing your racking will be mindful of the seismic zone that you're in, and they will design your racking accordingly. And of course, the number of storage levels. So if you're expecting to have two beam levels, or if you're going to have six beam levels because you got a 30-foot tall upright, those are all things that are going to be set out as part of the design of the racking to ensure that the capacities and everything else is meeting your needs. And the height to depth ratio. So, the height over the depth is supposed to be less than 6. So as the designers look to design their racking, and if they have very, very tall racking, however, the depth isn't the way it's supposed to, they now have to look at row spacers. They're going to connect those row spacers to the back of the upright to now allow for that D measurement to be much greater, therefore reining in that H over D ratio to a place where it needs to be. So as we look at the various components that we talked about earlier, there's also this idea of the warehouse or retail environment. So we want to be mindful if we're going to have if we're at a Lowe's or a Home Depot, will I want to design my racking to be slightly different than it would be if I'm in a warehouse environment. So we want to be mindful of the application of the design as well, because if I'm in a customer facing environment, I might want to look at things just slightly differently. Now, I know we're going in depth a little bit here, but I think these are great examples just of the amount of engineering and thought that goes into the design of a rack. Here are some types of loads that all the engineers, as they design racking, have to be mindful of. So the weight of the rack, the weight and products of the pallets, whether there's an earthquake load or notional lateral loads, and of course, depending on whether these racks are supporting a roof or if they're outside or otherwise, we all have to look at other components as well, such as the snow load, the wind load, and the impact load. And of course, I'm not going to bore you with all the different formulas that go into this, but it is a significant undertaking to be designing racking, and which is why we pay people a lot of money to be smart about looking at racking and the different components that have to be evaluated as they perform the calculations that come with it. And just like we do here at Damotech, we'll take all of this into consideration when we're performing a load capacity assessment on racking. Your OEMs are into the exact same thing so that they understand to the component, to the connection, where there are stresses and where do we have to improve the connection, or where do we have to have a better design of the racking to be able to support the needs of the client. So the outcome of all this, right? The outcome is what we call the LARC. So it's a load application and rack configuration drawing. So this is after all is said and done, after we've agreed on all the inputs and outputs, the designs and the materials that go into place. This is what's created by your OEM. So you should have this as part of the racking that's sold to you, so you understand all the different elements of racking that you should be looking on. And this will talk about, the dimensions of your beams, like I mentioned before, the dimensions of your base plates, all the different things that go into the design of your racking. So this is the output that you want to have on hand should OSHA come by and say, hey, do you have design documentation or engineering documentation for your racks? And you say, yes, let me go get my LARC. I'll show you what it looks like. And here you go. Now, the other output of all this, and I talked about how, that one binary event that OSHA will look for, well, it's your load capacity. So these have to be posted on your racking. Now, if you're lucky that all your racking is identical, so it's the exact same shape, the exact same height, the beam levels are all consistent throughout your entire warehouse, well, you just put one of these where at entrances to the racking where the folks are, and you're good to go. However, if there's a different rack configuration from one section to another, well, all of this information is going to change from one configuration of racking to the other. So it's whether you have a placard at the end of the aisles or you have a label on the beam, one or the other, these have to be displayed to be in compliance with code. So they have to be easy to read. They must match the LARCs. And of course, here's an example of what it looks like. And here's a zoomed in picture of what it looks like. So this is what you're going to want to have at the end of your aisles. Now, this is where we kind of get into rack damage and load capacity. Excuse me real quick. Now, rack damage reduces capacity. I think it goes without saying that if you impact an upright and you have a significant deformation, or if you have a a beam that was potentially overloaded, there's a compounding effect that takes place. Now, no engineer is going to step into your facility and say, I see that you have a rack that's designed for 2,500 pounds per pallet, and you have a half-inch deformation on the front of your upright column. I'm going to give you a 20% haircut on your capacity. Just doesn't work that way. You'd have to disassemble the upright, put it on the press, and then see at what point that does it give. So these kind of things you have to be mindful of when you have somebody come in and says, "Oh, hey, you know what? I know you were rated for such and such. You really just shave a few hundred pounds from your locations and you'll be fine." Not the case at all. So we want to be mindful of what damage can do to our capacities because we just don't know what the resulting effect is. So we want to address these things right away. Now, we talked about capacities for some time now. Let's circle back and talk about inspections once more so that we can close out this chapter. Inspections are important. We want to have them done by professionals, and we want to make sure we garner great information from the work that's been done. We talked about, again, having all these different elements looked after as part of a professional inspection. So we want to make sure that as you hire somebody to perform the inspection, that they're looking at all these different elements. So now I'm going to shift to the insight part of things. So make sure that whatever I get from my inspection is distilled in a way that's actionable. So what will that contain? Well, it's going to have the report findings. You're going to have a stamped report that comes with this, with engineers that looked over the information that was collected and now kind of put their seal on top to say, yes, this was done in accordance with everything. Are there Excel files that come with this that kind of form a database of the various issues? Are there pictures? Are you able to visualize what the inspector found as they performed their inspection? Is there a layout that's interactive? Now, I'm saying all these things because these are things that Damotech does as part of our service, but I think you should demand of your service providers that they also are able to kind of demonstrate this amount of details because these things are not inexpensive. And the more information you have at your fingertips, the easier it's going to be to address those issues. So, of course, having a summary of the recommendation, having an executive summary that kind of calls out all those critical findings is something you want to ensure you have. And of course, to the extent you have a load capacity service that was contemplated, you should have those placards and those labels furnished as well. Is the report, elaborate? Does a report say the things that needs to be said from the outset? Does it have graphs? Does it have tables and picture examples to kind of show the critical path that you need to follow in order to address the things that are most important in your facility? You should expect that these issues are at least categorized by severity. So the priority of unload. So if you look at those, think about those examples I showed at the beginning of the presentation where, the upright is not even making contact with the slab. Those are unload situations that have to be called out right away and people to act on immediately. And then I move into my high priority, which is I may not need to unload my location, but I should be addressing it ASAP because it could be just a matter of time before another impact leads to some of the catastrophes that we saw in the videos in the earlier part of the presentation. Then I kind of go into my moderate and my low, and the professional engineer that you have, the right folks will be able to categorize all the issues that they find in a way that makes a ton of sense so that you know what to focus on. But even though they might call that a low priority, that's important because it means that they saw it, but they categorize it the way it's supposed to. So we talked about the inspection, we talked about the insight and the information that we glean from that inspection. Now we get into the point at which the rubber meets the road. How will we ensure that we act on all of those things? Because as OSHA comes by, they're going to want to see if you have an inspection program. They're going to want to see, hey, what did you collect from that? And mostly they're going to say, well, fantastic. You have this great binder that shows us all of this wonderful information. Did you do anything with it? Did you put a plan in place to address it? And this is what we're going to talk about here. So there are two, ways to address, I would say upright damage. Very clear. I know it doesn't take a rocket science to kind of to know this. You're either going to repair the component or you're going to replace it. And you have to know the different approaches to consider. Look at manufacturing cycle time, look at the impact to operations as you evaluate whether you're going to repair a component or you're going to replace it. So if you are going to go down the road of replacing the component, it has to be like for like. So if you look at the design of the rack, the upright, and you're going to swap it out because it got damaged, it has to be the exact same spec as what you had before. So if you had a beam that was damaged and it's 96 inches long and it's 4 inches tall by 2.5 inches deep, you have to go back and get the exact same beam before. You won't be able to take a 96-inch beam that is 3 inches tall with a different depth. It just won't support the same weight. So you want to make sure that if you are going to go down the road of replacing components, which is just fine, by the way, just make sure it's like for like. If you go down the path of doing a rack repair, so you've evaluated the pros and cons of repairing versus replacing, maybe the cycle time on repairs is more advantageous to you. Maybe the fact that it's not as operationally impactful to your setup is something that you want to consider, or the fact that in many cases they come with a lifetime warranty against impact. So these are all things that may decide that you're going to sway towards rack repair. If you are, make sure it's an engineered solution. It has to restore the load capacity of the rack system that you have. Maintains the original configuration. Bolted versus field welding, is an important factor. And of course, consider the impact to operations. So here's a quick comparison of an upright replacement versus a permanent rack repair like we have. So typically on the upright replacement side, this manufacturing cycle time is considerably longer than what you're going to have on the rack repair side of things. From an unloading standpoint, look, imagine you got a 30-foot tall upright. the amount of time that it takes to uh, unload all of that freight, remove all of the beams on both sides of the upright, unbolt the upright, unanchor it, and then swap it out. That's a considerable amount of downtime versus on an upright, on a rack repair solution, if done the right way and with the right folks, can minimize by a lot what the impact to your operations will be from an unloading standpoint. Of course, installation, same thing. I mean, just think about it in reverse. You know, if I unloaded everything as a result of having to replace an upright, think now of the installation process of getting that upright back in, putting all of those beam levels back on, and then the freight that kind of comes with it versus the minutes that it takes to do rack repair. I mean, for the average 24-inch tall front repair kit, it takes, you know, experts like Damotech about 30 minutes to effect a repair. So compare that to the hours it'll take you to perform that same function when you replace an upright. And of course, there's this element of repeat damage, right? It's just a matter of time before an upright has been replaced, before it is re-impacted, because maybe it's where it is in the facility, maybe it's because of the velocity of operations, whatever the case is, it's a matter of time before that particular component gets re-impacted. So that's why we say when you replace a component, it can be re-impacted at any time, which will cause you to have to go through this whole thing once again, versus going through the solution of an engineered rack repair solution like the one we have, where you have built-in protection, and now you can withstand the impact from forklift collisions. So I've gone through my maintenance phase. You know, we followed the path, the critical path that was elaborated to us during the insight phase. I fixed all my high priority issues, but now I want to make sure that I'm not faced with these kind of things in the future. So we're going to want to put a prevention plan in place. So protection solutions kind of cover the gamut here. So we're going to want to have solutions for people, to protect infrastructure, assets, and of course, inventory. Now, to protect people, we'll look at, you know, putting fencing for pedestrian walkways. We'll want to have wire mesh decking, you know, in tunnels so that we don't have, you know, boxes that may be loose that could fall on people that are walking or operators as they navigate their way through the tunnel. And I mentioned before, we'll want to have netting if we have pedestrian walkways behind pallet locations where the operator could inadvertently push product into the walkway behind. So we'll want to ensure that we cover those areas as well. Uh, Protect infrastructure. We talked a lot about racking today, which is just fine. But you also have things like building columns that are supporting the entire, you know, building components from the roof to everything else. So if you think that having a damaged upright can cause problems, just imagine what it's going to be like when you pierce a column or you run into a concrete building column, and what effort, time, money, and just unfortunate time spent on trying to address these things. So if you protect the asset and you do it right, you know, you'll be able to get out of there unscathed. Protecting assets. So you have to stop looking at racking as a commodity. Racking is an asset. If you don't look after your racking, it just means you're going to have more locations that are out of service, which will just be an impediment to you distributing your product out to your customers, or, you know, whether in a manufacturing facility, whether you're not able to store components that'll help your production line. So we've talked a lot now. So rack safety, and I think you'll understand, is an ongoing process. It isn't like a one-hit wonder where you come in, you do an inspection once, you do one wave of repairs, and you're done. It's a constant evolution. It's that wheel that's turning that I spoke about before. Keep on putting the effort, the resources, and the dollars into having that process continue. So, and that goes towards ensuring, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation, having in-house knowledge, making sure that you train your folks on the things to look out for. So the benefits of safety education, of course, you're reducing injuries, You're reducing maintenance costs. You're reducing liability. You're extending the life of the racks. And of course, you're increasing productivity, which are all things that we want to do. And we do that by empowering others. We're teaching folks, associates that we have, down to, in some cases, the forklift operators, on the things they want to be looking out for as they make their way throughout the facility. So employee training, it's not just enough to be told to be safe. We have to have a behavior that comes with that as well. So having an awareness of regulations and ability to recognize risks, understanding the consequences of our actions, and of course, as I mentioned before, empowering workers. Having a safety culture is also very, very important. We'll want to make sure that as part of all the things that we do, that we ensure that of all things, that the employees appreciate that we're going to put time and effort towards having a culture that puts an emphasis on safety. And I think that will be probably the biggest thing you'll be able to do to impact the safety environment that you have in your facility. Now here's a video. I don't know if this sound is coming through, but ultimately, we're trying to make sure that our associates, get back home safe. They work hard at what they do, and the least we could do as company owners to ensure that they're working in the right environment, that safety is always put first, and they go back home to their families. So employee training, training is for everyone. So it's not just leadership. It's the operational folks. It's the safety professionals. It's down to the workers as well. So ensure that all facets of your organization are mindful of the safety precautions that need to be taken with racking, because the more folks are aware, the more buy-in you get from the various points of leadership, the more, I think, seamless of a rack safety program you'll have. So as we continue to make our way, we have senior management, we have managers, as I mentioned before, from safety and maintenance and operations, and of course, our forklift operators, which I talked about, are also, I think, a key part of all this. Having third-party expertise is certainly something that we want to be mindful of. I think I talked enough about today the things that we want to be focused on. So tracking and reporting. Why? Because having a clear communication through the chain of command, I think, is something that's sometimes forgotten. If you don't have visibility of some of those things, it's tough to ensure that there's accountability or that you're monitoring progress. So if you don't have visibility from A to Z of work, of where those issues are in the path to getting resolved, it'll be awfully difficult to say whether you've reached success or not. So what are the kind of things we want to track and report, and what? So certainly having your rack configuration documentation on hand, having your inspection reports, knowing the issues that are there, ensuring that the modifications and repairs have been tracked, and of course, the training records. These are all things that you should have on hand in the event you have an OSHA inspector come by. This will just demonstrate that you're on top of things. Tracking inspection issues, I think I mentioned it already, but you'll want to ensure that you look at the history of things. Are those issues still, unrepaired? Have I skipped over some things? And having a software from a qualified third party to do that, I think, will go a long way in ensuring that you know where you stand when it comes to taking care of some of these things. Now, I talked about the rack safety flywheel, so just a recap on what that does. We want to ensure that we understand what we're solving for, why we're putting this safety program in place, so we're mindful of our employees, compliance to codes and standards, and the operational impact that it has to our warehouse. That we're relying on the experts from the outside, but also we're empowering our own people. Then, of course, we make our way through the wheel on the inspection, the insight, maintenance, and prevention. Now, um, as we look at the focus on warehousing and distribution and the national emphasis program, I think we have to be just mindful of the things that can uh, get us in trouble. The things that inspectors will point to as they come through the facilities and then can get us dinged on. So having a look through at all the different things that we have as part of the rack safety program, from our load capacities to our inspection records to a repair and maintenance program, will help us ensure that any focus that OSHA will have in warehousing and distribution won't encounter any issues as they were to come by our facilities. So acting now to ensure your warehousing compliant and safe is an important prerogative. So as they continue to make our way here, so how can Damotech help you? So this is kind of a closing statement. First and foremost, we're looking to be a rack safety partner. With integrated solutions, we're by far the largest provider in North America. Our engineering expertise from a compliance standpoint to be able to do load capacity calculations and rack safety training kind of sets us apart from the others that are out there. Rack safety products, from engineered repair solutions, which I've kind of shown a little bit throughout the presentation, to protection devices, and of course, the lifetime warranty that comes with our Pro line of rack repairs, again, puts us in a leading position to be able to solve your issues. And of course, it goes without saying, and I think I've highlighted it enough today, having a platform or some form of software to give you a keen eye on the things that are going on at your facility, so you know what to address, when to address it, and to ensure that you're in control is an important aspect of how Damotech can help you throughout your rack safety journey. So so as we look at the Q&A, I will ask my partners here to maybe look at some of the questions that we have. So Charles, are you on?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
I certainly can.
Great, great. So why don't I jump into it? I have one right now that is asking, when the OSHA people, if they come in ever, and they ask for documentation, what exactly do they want? What is it that they need typically? Okay, so what I know is Mark mentioned LARC, so load application and rack configuration drawings. These are the stamped engineering drawings that you got from the original manufacturer. Now, many locations we visit, people have totally lost these documents, or they have made so modifications through the years that they don't know where they stand anymore. And so you need to have an engineer come in, a specialized engineer, I would say. And this is the difficult part, because normal engineering companies deal with construction, and racking is a very specific domain where if you don't have any experience, you don't really know how to calculate these things. It's really hard. So of course, Damotech provides that kind of service where we go in and we measure the racks and we reverse engineer it to determine load capacities. And then we can even provide you with load capacity plaques and labels. So that's about it. Once they have that documentation that says we're in control, we know what the capacity is, it is displayed on the rack, we have inspected it, there's a few things we need to fix left and right, but we're in control, they're happy with that. It's a bit like, think about your insurer. If they are being told that you are regularly doing what it is to maintain them safely, everybody's happy with that. Another question, okay, quick question. Will the PowerPoint be available to the?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, so there'll be a download that's available of the recording, and that'll be available to those that participate in today's webinar. Yep.
Okay. There's a funny question that I can answer here. Do you have the how-to guide to make the foam core racking that you showed? It's actually my son. He was 16 back then when he created it. It was really hard to do, and to make the uprights really straight, we had to build a jig, out of foam core as well. It was really hard, so I don't really recommend it. Right now, Demotech, we're moving into 3D printing for these things. So maybe Liz, you could contact us again Not right now. We're preparing the ProMat show right now, but in a few months, perhaps we can send you one as a gift. Anonymous, sorry, can you send me more information about the rack safety training program? I guess that will come after the presentation.
Right, correct. Yeah, and we'll have a bunch of downloads, and of course, for anybody that's wanting to dig deeper into the presentation or topics of the presentation, we have got to be close to 100 blogs, I'm sure, that are on our website that talk into whether it's rust, whether it's looking at things that are out of plumb. So a wealth of information out there. So yep.
Great. Someone is asking, we've had people come in and weld the repairs to the racks. They fix it by welding on site. What is the reason for using rack repair kits compared to local help?
Yeah, and look, I mean, it's like anything that I've said before, and I think you want to, go on the side of having an engineered solution. RMI has, put out a fairly comprehensive document that's a great guideline for folks that are wondering whether to go down the rack repair solution route or look at, other field elements. And I think it just goes without saying that as you look at local labor and field welding, it just comes with a bunch of just uncertainty and variables that are tough to control. But ultimately, it comes down to has an engineered provided backup documentation to say that whatever was done to address the rack issue that you have, that it's in compliance with codes. So to me, that's what it all comes down to, which is why, there's more and more folks that are gravitating towards engineered solutions like ours because of the expertise that we have in the realm and the documentation that we have by engineers to support it.
Yeah. A question by Martin here. Should all repairs be done before having rack inspected?
No, I think there are two schools of thought on that. I think my preference, as we have in the flywheel, is to have the inspection done first so that you'll be able to understand the severity of the different issues that you're going to have with your racking. Some folks will decide they want to go through a round of repairs and then having someone come in after the fact to kind of look at things. So I think there's probably a case to be made for both. But I would say if I had to lean in one direction, I think starting off with the inspection, understanding the baseline of things and the priority of those issues will help you be much more, I would think, mindful and judicious with the use of the funds that you have.
What is the duration, cost, and topics covered in the training, the rack safety training?
Oh, so the one that we perform online, which is by far the most common one, takes about 2 to 2.5 hours. So it's a very so it's not like super in depth, but it covers all the highlights of a rack safety program, at least to get folks introduced to the things that they want to look after. Now, there's also an on-site one that's, about 3 to 4 hours long. But I would say just because people are busy, oftentimes we see the remote training being the one that's most effective. And it's great for folks as you have turnover in your organizations and you want to get folks up to speed with the things to look out for when they're performing their own inspections. Those training programs that we have are awfully effective.
Great.